Oh. All right. Oh, fuck, it's so hot.
Oh, we should have been done like an hour ago.
Can you still hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Yes, we should have been done an hour ago, but... Or is that what you said?
Hey everyone, thanks for joining me for another episode of Third Concept. Today, my guest is a very talented creative director. We know each other from working together at the same agency for about 5 years. He's also a husband, a father of twin boys, and honestly, he's one of the first people I thought to invite on the show because he has a very strong reputation for telling it like it is, and he's always full of surprises. Dialing in from Kokomo, Indiana, I introduce you to Alan Hevelone. Welcome, Alan. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to start kind of weird.
Okay.
You have this fun tendency to be self-deprecating at times, which I love. I think that it's a great quality and certainly one where I know I want to be friends with somebody if they're making fun of themselves. But
Tell that
I
to my
got some
therapist.
I got some feedback from people before and just wanted to share. You look terrified. It's not a ton, so don't get too excited. Someone who is your direct report said, Alan was great to work with and always had my back. And I feel like that's definitely indicative of what a lot of people have said in terms of like you having other people's backs. So another person said, Alan is literally the voice of the people. He'll say the hard or awkward thing and is always the first to call out bullshit. He is 100% an ally for other creatives.
That is true. I just wish other creatives would line up behind me so I could not be the mouthpiece all the time.
Agree. One more. Alan's creative instincts are classic and trustworthy. His desire to break the mold and do new things is palpable and inspiring. He's a super creative force.
Wow. It's great to hear so many people say such nice things about me.
So I have a totally random curveball question for you. Are you ready?
Does it matter?
Tell us about your experience inside the egg.
The egg. The egg.
What is the egg?
The harmonic egg. You should look it up. It is a egg-shaped pod. This is, well, first of all, getting inside the egg is kind of like an alternative therapy technique that has recently been brought to my attention. There's only like 150 of these things in the world. They're super expensive, but for some reason, a dude has decided to put one in Kokomo, Indiana, of all places. And he discovered it on his own healing journey that was taking place in like, I don't know, he was in Thailand or something. And he just found it so profound that he knew he had to bring it back to his home life and kind of expose his community to it. So it is like this egg-shaped pod that you sit in a zero-gravity chair. So you're essentially in a lazy boy. I mean, like your feet are up and you're kind of back, but you feel like perfectly supported and comfortable. You have a blanket on, and there's a speaker at either end. You know, so it's kind of oblong-shaped, and there's a speaker at either end. And because the internal is actually kind of, I think it's like 12-sided. So there's like kind of 12 facets. And it's the way it kind of like carries the sound, right? And they use specific therapeutic frequencies in the sound construction, and that can be programmed based on what you are trying to work on. And you sit and you are exposed to the sound, and you're just kind of like, basically all your other kind of senses are cut off, in the sense of like you're cut off from the outside world. It's just you and the sound. And you get sound for 40 minutes and then 10 minutes of silence to reintegrate your mind to stepping back out of the egg. I am totally into the idea of like alternative and new age style therapies, but I'm also inherently skeptical as all get out, right? A lot of faith in science and Western medicine, not as much inherent faith in alternative therapies, but I like the idea of them. So I went into it with an open mind, but a healthy amount of skepticism. And the first session of anybody's healing plan is the same in the sense that it's meant as an autonomic nervous system reset. Mm-hmm. So basically just chilling out your autonomic nervous system. Mm-hmm. And I came out and like immediately just felt more in tune, calmer. And backstory on that, I have a very chaotic household, twin 5-year-olds, nearly 5, both autistic, both with a lot of challenges. My house is very loud, is very messy. As a result, like my autonomic nervous system is like on edge all the time. And I have some of that already kind of built in, but immediately everything shifted for me. Mm-hmm. And that, like, you know, in other communities, they would call it like kind of like a pink cloud, right? That pink cloud was like really pronounced, and it lasted for a few days. Like, I mean, so much so that my wife was like, wow, you are like so different than you were yesterday.
Interesting.
But as with all pink clouds, your brain kind of accommodates or reverts back to your kind of normal modality, right? Or way of thinking and way of kind of like inherently behaving in the world and reacting to the world around you. So I went back. I've already done 2 sessions in the egg. I did one yesterday, and that as an end result has resulted in a much calmer demeanor, less anxiety, like palpable.
I share your interest/skepticism in alternative therapies, but at the same time, you're saying it's palpable, and how would you measure that? You know, like
there's no other way. Better. It's not quantifiable, right? Like,
but I think you can though, like with heart rates and, you know.
Oh,
different
yeah, well,
physiological...
sure. But for me, I'm not doing any of that, right? Like I'm not sitting here trying to attach scientific metrics to it. Yeah. My metrics are anecdotal, right? I mean, like I feel them.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. And that goes against the grain of what I generally choose to use as measurement.
I love sound therapy of any, like, I adore it. I'm much more of a sound person than a visual person.
Okay.
You have a background, obviously, of both. So
yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about maybe creatively, energetically, what the 2 different, you know, like visual arts as opposed to audio arts, what influence they've had on your life?
I would say that they probably have almost equal impact on me and my creative process. I mean, I have been obsessed with music since I was a kid. I mean, like, I can still, like, one of my favorite songs and I couldn't have been, I think it came out in 81. So like I was probably 3 because it was on popular radio because that's all what we had to listen to if it wasn't on 8-track, you know, or records or whatever. And so there was a lot of time spent listening to the radio in my family. And my favorite song was You Can Do Magic by America. You can do magic. You can do anything your heart. Anyway.
I don't remember that one.
Oh my gosh. I to this day, I can still be transported back to being 3 years old when I hear that song. And I'm not somebody who, like, I don't have a tremendous amount of memory of even, like, I would say, like, just pre-adolescence and earlier. Like, I don't have a lot of concrete memories. And I mean, I get that not many people do, but like, I can be taken back emotionally and psychically back to that space by the power of music. But even music, in the sense of trying to, like, figure out how to play a guitar or play a piano, like, it didn't hold my interest long enough. It felt too difficult, and I couldn't engage. But I could engage in listening and being carried away emotionally by music. And it stayed with me obsessively, and it still does. And then the other part of that is that I was exposed to album art, right? Album art used to be, well, I mean, it used to be a thing at all, right? It's coming back as a thing, I think. But that physical object, and that I had a romantic passion about a physical object, right?
Yeah.
And like the whole process and everything. I mean, it's like, and so
the way new CDs would smell, like the booklets.
And so to like that idea of like, well, oh, that's the smell of ink. So then when I'm going, you know, and I'm becoming a graphic designer and I'm going on press runs and I'm doing all this stuff, it's like, it again takes me back to those spaces, because the smell of ink is something that is reminiscent of a record or a CD, or, you know, book lovers talk about like that dusty smell of books, you know, like being able, and like, I like that smell, but I'm not an avid reader, so it doesn't do the same thing for me. But music and like the smells around music, like there's that faint electronic smell sometimes, like that comes from the equipment, you know, like all of that stuff, like has had like served unconsciously or subconsciously, like my creative workings. I wanted so bad to work with music, but you know, those kinds of things, I feel like in a lot of ways are like your chances of becoming an NBA star. You know, I kind of like shelved some of my internal creative fires in favor of like, okay, I have these skills, because they're technical skills at the end of the day, mixed with creativity. I can take the technical skills and apply them. And, you know, it doesn't matter that I'm not like that creatively interested in this. I can still do it, and I can still bring about creativity.
Sure.
And I can still activate that. It doesn't, you know, but it's not, it never has excited me in a way that I'd hoped. Right?
I mean, I think there is a concession at some point where if you are a creative's creative, where you really love art, but you're doing this because you also love to eat and have a place to live. But at the same time, like I can see with designers, even in the simplest projects, like you could show me 3 different heroes and I could tell you which designer did which one, even if they're all like equally competent, because they still
mine are
bring
pretty
their
obvious,
own.
I think.
Why do you say that? Like,
I don't know. Like, I say that because people have said that about me. Which is, you know, like I'm always like, I can't tell if it's ever like it's a backhanded compliment, you know.
What do
or
you think
if it's,
they mean?
I think now, after enough years in the industry, it's that I finally do have a noticeable style. I love color. I'm not afraid of like big. In fact, I think you can always tell mine. It's going to be the boldest one.
Do you see the industry going somewhere? Where do you see it going? Do you have any predictions? Because it's not great right now.
No, I it's hard for me to believe that the way it's going right now is sustainable.
Right. Agree.
We are, as an industry, increasingly agencies are now owned by these holding companies, which are just private equity firms, which are just looking at bottom line, and they're not looking at anything else. It is like the natural derivative end of capitalism, right? It just all comes down, and like humans are humans, and by extension, then human creativity is going to be sacrificed.
I think it'll just transform into something else, because I think the creative spirit is like water finding its own level. It's just going to find some other way for us to do something different. I'm just not sure what.
Yeah, but I mean, so, you know, I guess my concern becomes, well, whatever that is, how do we feed ourselves and our families and our future? How do we feed the future with that? Like, it's just, it's hard. It's a really tumultuous time right now, I think. You know, like technology's getting smarter. The people that have been in the industry for a long time and are seeing this new technology, and they're seeing the way younger people like adapt to this technology or use it in a way. I mean, like, I start to sound like boomer at this point, but you know, like, it is like a really kind of like angsty thing. I think I hope that it's all going to like allow us to evolve, right? And like you say, we're going to find our own level and things are going to work out. But it's hard to believe from my viewpoint right now that I can't see what that's going to look like. It's just so out of focus for me.
I just think like creative not having its own presence within capitalism as we know it, just it ceasing to be, that doesn't seem reasonable to me. It's like technology stopping, like AI just
Sure.
then now takes over all the IT jobs. Like it's not, there's always going to be something. And I think because we're creatives, we'll create another way to sustain ourselves. Maybe I'm just too idealistic, but
Right.
we'll figure something else out, like ways to, because people are consuming stories more than ever, even though a lot of it is just fluff.
Yeah.
Were there artists or like what was it about design pre-college where you were like, oh God, I got to do this?
It was being involved with the yearbook at school and kind of getting involved, and like all these misfits worked on the yearbook at my school.
Yeah.
And I totally fit in with those guys ultimately, like and actually I should say I wanted to fit in with those folks. Those were the kids that I really wanted to be accepted by.
Why?
I don't know. There was like some kind of inherent coolness in my mind to being a misfit, and I never really felt that I fit in with all these other groups entirely. Like I could, but like I felt like I was faking it a lot of times. And to be honest, I felt like I still feel like I'm faking it as a misfit, right?
Really?
A lot of the time. Oh, yeah. I mean, imposter syndrome to the max here. And the fact that I could at least identify, like, I really don't know where I fit, so this feels best. Because I feel like all these people don't really know where they fit, except everybody else seems so effortlessly cool in this group, and I just wasn't.
In my experience in school, I definitely didn't fit in anywhere. I was not nerdy enough to be friends with nerds. I definitely wasn't cool. So I was part of, like, we called them freaks. We were not misfits. It was freaks. But I wasn't in the freaks. There was also that, here's what you wear. Like, you're the goth, part of the freaks, or this is your skater. Like, I wasn't any of those things. I just didn't fit in. So I was like a miscellaneous. Right. So I feel similarly to you, where it's kind of like, by default, you're in the only group that's going to accept you because
and honestly, I'm in the only group that I really want to be a part of.
Right. Yeah.
Like in the long run,
because they listen to better music.
Yeah, definitely, and that was 100% what it was, because they were listening to punk rock and techno, and those were like the two things that I wanted to listen to. Yeah.
So, we know why you went into design, and you're a fake architecture major. Is that the major?
Yeah, it was. Yes. And I did it to fake out my parents, to get them to agree to pay for college, which they did. And then I switched to graphic design very early, and my dad said, well, I'm not going to pay for college anymore. I was like, okay, let me show you what a graphic designer does. And I literally took him to the supermarket, and I just said, look around. I said, almost everything you see that's not like produce started on the desk of somebody like I'm going to be. Everything.
That's amazing. That's awesome. And what did he say?
He was like, okay, you're right. You're right. There's going to be no shortage of work. And that was like also like, what is that, 96, 97? So like the internet was in its infancy. So we didn't even really know how it was going to explode
Right.
at that point. Yeah, so that's how I ended up in graphic design. And I really didn't know what avenue I was going to go in. I mean, as a starry-eyed college graduate, I wanted to go into music, posters and record art and CD art and, you know, all that stuff. And that was never to be. I mean, I dabbled in it. I have some
I
experience
saw a
in
little bit. So when you became a DJ,
it. We didn't even
when
talk about this.
well, I don't
That
know
just came
how
out of
old.
nowhere.
Well, it's been established. You've told me we know each other, so I know this about you. And I'm actually most curious about this because I know nothing about any details. When did that happen? How did it start? How old were you?
Okay, so my introduction to it was 9th grade. So what is that? You're 13, I think? 13 or 14?
14 or 14.
So, and I had kind of already rebranded myself as like, you know, I was into The Cure and Red Hot Chili Peppers and like, you know, like all these like American, or not American, but just like all like the popular alternative artists of the time, right? But I was accelerated in math. So as a freshman, I was in an 11th grade math class right away. And so I was in there with these juniors, and these juniors were going to these things that were new called raves. And I was just like, whoa, what's this? You know, or all these bands that was classified as rave music, but it was like Jesus Jones before they became, popular here, Primal Scream, just all these like British newer indie bands that were tied to these big field raves and all these like kind of legal things. And then that was starting to happen in the US by the time I kind of came into high school, and these older kids were doing, and I just became totally enamored with it, for better and worse, right? Because I became enamored with the drugs. I became enamored with like the lying that you had to kind of do, the secrets that you had to keep, the status of like being in on something that like not everybody was, like I never went to a party in high school, and I thought that was like status, right? I didn't go to parties of my peers. I just went to these like raves.
Yeah, my friends did too. And so I didn't go because I didn't do drugs. So I was like, I'm going to skip the scene, but I do like the music. I thought the music was fun.
So there you go. See, it's, you didn't miss much. No, the drugs were fun. I'm not going to lie. The drugs were fun. But I am also a person who struggles with moderation, right?
What was it about the music that you liked? Like, why that genre? Or was it just because it was part of the scene? You just must have liked the music.
No, I did. I liked the music. But I do think initially it really had to do with like the status factor on it. But I grew to really appreciate the music. So that the guy from that math class who, like, he actually went on to become a pretty well-known DJ.
Really?
At least on the East Coast. Like, it's not like worldwide, but he was responsible for bringing all these DJs from the UK to the US for the first time, and he himself has had some success in that scene. So he was starting to DJ, right? And he was and then he would also DJ our school dances just because he was like the one who had the stuff. And so I started doing that with him. And kind of renting the PA equipment and kind of, being like almost like his roadie kind of thing. But I mean, like just helping. And so that exposed me to it and exposed me to kind of the concept of it. And then he sold me my first set of turntables, like, cause he was upgrading. So I got his old ones. And I, just kind of like, I loved it, but I didn't have like, again, it's kind of, I didn't have the work ethic to really like invest a lot of time in it. But I loved collecting the music. And that's really what I ended up zeroing in on, which, is the reason that I have like a record collection now that is not allowed in the house. It is in the home office, which is on the far side of the garage, because there's thousands of records out there.
So no matter how many years I do this, I have a certain, especially if it's an important project, I have a process that I go through, which is, I've noticed that energy is such an integral part of our everyday, like every single thing we do. And when it comes to creative, it's even more so. And I know I have to just go through this very lengthy process of feeling what I feel in response to either brainstorming or critiquing other people's work. And it comes through as like an energy, and I have to sift through it and understand, what does that feeling mean? You know, like even if it's like the letters are too big, it starts as a feeling like, so
Yeah, right.
when you're creating, you know, one of those bolder concepts that are a little bit less the norm and more of like you, like how do you get there to the right one? Because for most of us, it's not immediate. So how is the process of coming from like the blank page into the final product? Like what types of things do you go through to get there?
A lot of obsession, a lot of mess, a lot of the wrong thing, right? Like I rarely, and not to make this or seem like this is somehow unique or whatever, and it's always the case, but like, you know, like rarely is my first instinct ever right, but I would say 8 times out of 10, my first instinct still comes through in that final idea, right? Like that's all raw feeling, right? I mean, that's just like okay, my instinct tells me that this is what it is, and I lay it out, and it's like totally all wrong, but the idea of what it was still makes its way through as I start to kind of like fine tune and shift and you know, rotate and flip and add, you know, whatever it is to it. And I can't necessarily, you know, I'm not looking at something unless I'm critiquing somebody else and kind of looking at the work and kind of evaluating, and I can't necessarily look at it and go, oh, the type's too, you know, like, oh, I don't like that typeface, or oh, you know, like, I mean, but it's not that like, oh, that seems too radical. It's just like, that just doesn't feel right. I don't know why. It just doesn't feel right. And so I just sit there until it does, right? And like, that literally involves me like pushing like 1 pixel at a time sometimes, and then going back, and then going back again, and then, you know, like, let's increase that by 2%. Okay, let's shrink that by, you know, I mean, like, it's these like, it gets to be these like just tiny little minutia. But it's all based on feeling. None of it is really, unless I'm working directly from somebody's like dictated brand guidelines, I'm rarely ever. And so, and that's the way I kind of even bring to creative reviews too of other people's work, is that like, I don't know, it's just a feeling. So like, yeah, it's all gut. I don't know. It's literally all gut, and I don't. And if I don't care about a project, my gut only my gut has a very low threshold for what's acceptable, right?
Wait, so
oh no, it's the other way, right? Or is it?
Yeah, it doesn't care. It's just
It doesn't
like, yeah,
care.
sure.
Yeah, my gut is just like, great, it's done. I don't care.
Same, yeah. Which is, it kind of gets me to my next question, what I was going to ask you, like, how do you feel about your process? Because I feel like the more we care, if we do have this tendency to like overanalyze and just submerge ourselves completely for weeks in this thing and think about it constantly. I know I have this other voice in my head saying, holy shit, just fucking finish it. Like, what is all this thinking? Like, hurry up. But that's part of the beauty of it, is the painstaking.
Yeah, I think we need it. Right? I mean, I think you need that level of obsession. But to your point, you do need, and I think you only develop over time and experience of that like knowing when to say when. Like, it's okay. You know, like, this is like, I could sit here and noodle this thing for the next 3 days, or I could say, literally nobody but me and maybe you is going to notice the difference.
Yeah.
Increasingly, as I get older, strangely, it's harder. Well, I can't show enthusiasm for work I don't really care about. I can sell something,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think you actually have to have passion about something to sell it.
Correct. Yeah.
But you'll know when I'm passionate about something.
Right. Yeah.
And not necessarily in a good way, right? I'll be more defensive. I'll be more, like, aggressive a lot of times about trying to push the idea. But like, for me, well, for others that can be alienating, but for me, I'm like, I don't know how to live any other way. Like, I can't hide this the way I can mask my indifference. I can mask indifference. I can't mask passion.
I'm not so sure, because I think that when people are passionate, their tone of voice changes. And if you don't hear that, like, people can hear indifference. Even if you sound good, I can hear it. I think people can feel it.
You're a creative.
True. Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, I can't shit a shitter.
Yeah. In terms of this authenticity, and also you're a outspoken person who doesn't ever really actually bullshit people, even though you've had a people-pleasing past, but being a fairly authentic person, would you say that you care about what other people think?
Sadly, yeah.
Do you? Is that like across the board, or in only specific types of relationships?
I think it's usually only ever in hindsight.
Interesting.
Like, I'm going through a situation now, right, where there was some differences. The relationship was severed, and I'm essentially being ghosted by the other party.
Mm-hmm.
And it is driving me insane
Mm-hmm.
that I have been ghosted. I have no problem with the ending of a relationship, but when you're ghosted, or you have no context for the ending from the other party, I get like obsessed with, like, what was it? It's almost like you've died and nobody told you how you died, and you're just kind of left with this, like, gaping why. That may be, I don't know, that could be like mental illness that I care so much in only these instances. But like, it really is like, I care how I've made people feel. And oftentimes it happens in hindsight again, because like, I tend to run and run and run and run and not know what I'm leaving in my wake. Mm-hmm. Right? So running my mouth, and then, people are like really offended by something I said, and I'm like, wait, what did I say? And when they tell me how what I said made them feel, I care deeply that I made them feel that way. And and I'm just like overwhelmed by, like, not regret, remorse, and a desire or willingness to make amends that isn't just rooted in satisfying my own ego. It's like this genuine, like, shit, like, I hate that I made you feel that way. Mm-hmm. But it still doesn't stop me from running and running and running and with little to no awareness of the implications of what I'm doing sometimes.
True, but I think that everybody is going to hurt people unknowingly, whether they're running, walking, crawling, or sleeping. Like, it's always going to happen no matter what. Do you want something specific from this person, or you just want clarity?
Clarity, but that's only to satisfy me. But But clarity can also be like, oh, I can better understand what happened and what my role was in it, right? And like, at the end of the day, you're only responsible to, keep your side of the street clean.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I was never aware of before kind of exposure to that type of therapeutic environment, in the sense of like, oh, right. Like, so I don't think that I necessarily cared what people thought of me or what I said until it was like, okay, somebody sat you down and said, okay, go over all the times that you've been hurt, right? Or that you feel that you've been wronged. And part of that process is go, okay, well, what was your role in that?
Mm-mm.
What did you do? And you have to like kind of like face that. And then you're like, oh, with that kind of came this advent of like, oh, I do greatly care about what other people think, but more in the sense of I care about how other people feel and if they've felt something as a result of my action, right?
Yeah.
So it's, I don't care what people think of my work necessarily, but I care what people think about me as a person and how I've, engaged with them honestly, authentically, with integrity, with compassion. And if I haven't, I seek to right that wrong.
Yeah. It's interesting how sometimes we seek to have a greater awareness of self. I would hope,
Everybody
anybody
should,
would.
yeah.
But sometimes that awareness causes so much more complexity into our life, and sometimes additional negativity, because if you're ignorant, then you just keep going. And
Right.
if you have awareness, you can, usually you're living a better life, because the more aware you are, the more conflict you usually should
Avoid or manage to,
Yeah. So it's just funny how sometimes it can actually overcomplicate your life, even though awareness should make it simpler.
Yeah, because then you start to like obsess and you game out all the scenarios that could have happened. There's a fine line between like humility and humiliation. Like, are you going to humiliate yourself in pursuit of like making to undo the wrong, or are you going to like be humble enough to admit and not blow it out of proportion, but hey, I was wrong. That's it, and like just let it be. And then it's on to the other party.
You once described yourself to me as always, for better or worse, a work in progress on display, which I like that phrase. And it sort of ties into this, because when I hear that, it feels like an acceptance of just a fluid state of being. And to me, sometimes when you have these unfinished conflicts with people, or where they just don't speak to you again or whatever, like I've definitely dealt with that a lot in the past couple of years of my life, and one of the major things is the lack of acceptance. And so it's kind of the same energy of like, just like, I'm just here and I'm bobbing around and I did the best I could with this person, and that's all that I need to be, is like.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, a lot of that comes, you hope that comes with age. Some people are obviously more immune to that level of growth than others. But I guess when I said that I wanted to be, just kind of a work in progress on display, I joke that I want my tombstone to read just work in progress, as if like, whatever's happening beyond is just part of the work. Everybody wants to inherently hide their mess. Nobody wants to see the mess behind the finished product. They just want the finished product. So you just try to like pretend that the mess doesn't exist.
I think people love watching a mess. Personally.
People love watching other people's mess. They have no tolerance for their own, right?
Yeah, which is ridiculous.
And they judge themselves on their own constantly. And I'm as guilty of that as anybody else. But that's what I mean by is that like I strive not to live that way and be like, you know what? I'm a sick person. You're a sick person. We're all sick people. Like, we're all just people just kind of bobbing along, like you said, and we're doing the best we can. And like, that's okay. And if I show that as myself, then hopefully other people will reflect that back to you, or be willing to allow themselves that vulnerability too, because like vulnerability is where the action is, and I don't really like, I like small talk in the sense I'm very good at it because I developed it as a skill, but I really love to get people talking about themselves and get to a point where they're comfortable with me asking vulnerable questions, right? Or questions that will make them feel more vulnerable. And to do so, you have to be vulnerable yourself, because you have to be like, I'm not shitting you. Like, this is my experience. You can believe me because I am telling you this. And that's what I mean by being a work in progress. And I think that inherently becomes a creative way of existing.
Do you feel that being vulnerable has gotten you in trouble?
Oh, 100%.
And was it worth it?
Is it what?
Was it worth it? Do you typically stand by, like, say, well, yeah, it got me in trouble, but I was true to myself and...
Yeah, I mean, I think, listen, I'm somebody who will say all the things that everybody else is saying or thinking, and all those people will pat you on the back later and be like, thanks for saying everything that we're thinking. And I don't regret speaking my truth in general. And I think I had a lot of time where I never really knew what my truth was in growing up. And so to have that voice now, I do it unapologetically. And it gets me in trouble, and I have to backtrack, and I have to make amends, and I have to, there are things I have to do, but that's just because things have consequences, right? And like, if you're living authentically, I can wake up and choose to be an asshole as long as I'm willing to accept the consequences of being an asshole, right? Or I can, but like, I don't want to be known as an asshole, but I do want to be known as like a both passionate and compassionate, real human being. And I'm not going to apologize for that.
What do you think speaking your truth means? Like, how would you quantify that?
I guess living your truth or speaking your truth is being willing to play your cards even when you know you might have a losing hand. It's that, like, well, this is what I've got. This is what it is from my point of view. Yeah, I think it's just that willingness to kind of just like bring your vulnerabilities to whatever the situation is, being just willing to. I'm not saying you have to in every situation, but like being willing to put those on the line in order to be understood or to be human. I don't know.
I'm trying to think of other people that I know who are outspoken, and typically those people are not described as big connectors. Like, it's not like I think the people who are talented at the lip service maybe get more of the credit of like, oh, he's a good guy, like he's a great guy, you could talk to him. But the people who are outspoken, the outspoken people have a bit of a bad reputation sometimes for their people skills because they are honest, yet those are the people where you're going to have the much more genuine connection with.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. I think that's who I am. I don't feel, I'm not everybody's taste, but I can get along with everyone, right? Like, I can get along with everybody if I keep my true self subdued. I think some of my more excited and authentic self is still attractive, but eventually it might get to a point where it becomes abrasive to somebody because I'm willing to unfilter, the way I speak to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then it turns out I made the wrong gamble and I should have been more filtered. Like I make an assumption sometimes, oh, you can take this. You're going to be able to. But other times I do it subconsciously and I don't intend to hurt. And then I have to, like I said, I have to be willing to go back. And that's that thing, right? Like I am always willing to go back and re-examine.
Yeah.
And better understand from that other person's perspective what went wrong.
I was extremely unfiltered in my teens and early 20s.
Oh.
I know it's like some people they have opinions about me, and I'm like, boy, you should have seen me 20 years ago. But I do
I would have loved to have seen you 20 years ago.
God, it was just terrible. But
don't have compassion for yourself.
I'm having a montage of flashbacks of some. Yeah, it's just actually it's actually a pretty fun montage. You would enjoy it, so I'll take that back.
I like everybody's mess.
Oh boy, but I found that this self-awareness work does kind of stop the unfilteredness, the unnecessary over the top unfilteredness. Do you feel that there's
I haven't gotten there yet.
I was gonna say maybe
or maybe I've gotten worse. No, I was definitely worse when I was drunk. And I'm less drunk now in general, so I'm definitely better. I don't know. I mean, I think everybody's different, right? I mean, and for me, I think any level of like kind of roughshod outspokenness before lacked self-awareness. And so what I have now, sure, maybe it has been subdued or kind of like honed. Because you learn to care about this or that or when not to care about something. But like, I don't think it's necessarily tempered my inability to stop from going over that edge in moments that really matter to me.
So tell me about New York City.
So New York City, so 2002, the summer of 2002, I'm 24 years old at the time, and I decided that I would waste all of my money and move there instead of just most of it visiting. So I made a kind of a deal with myself. I ate nothing but ramen noodles and peanut butter and jelly for 6 months, and sold my car and moved to New York City with no plan. Just I trusted a friend to find an apartment. He found an apartment. It was the most expensive apartment I lived in because I moved in with this rich kid who just didn't care how much an apartment cost. So it was like I struggled. I paid $1,000 for a room that was like the size of a postage stamp. But it was in Williamsburg, which was like the epitome of cool at the time. And then I started working in Connecticut, in Darien, Connecticut. So I did the reverse commute for 3 years from Brooklyn to Darien, Connecticut, just to basically get myself a foot in the door in New York, because nobody in New York gave a shit about me. And then eventually parlayed that into a job in New York.
So that whole time in your life you took a bit of a risk, but also it seems like you made smart decisions because it really kind of launched your career.
Yeah.
I mean, it worked out. You made correct choices.
It did. But I mean, I think, if looking back on it with, 46-year-old eyes, it feels really...
That's what I was going to say. Like, if you had to do it again, you probably would do things completely differently.
Yeah.
But at that time...
It was the only way I knew.
but it probably also didn't feel as much of a risk as when you look back at it now and say, holy shit,
Yeah.
I just went
No,
for it.
because I mean, apart from the rich roommate, everybody was broke. Everybody I knew was broke in New York. We were all young. We were all dumb. We were, and we had no money. So we were all like, okay, well, we all get along because we're all doing, we're all in the same shit sandwich.
Yeah.
So to speak.
It's interesting sometimes when you look back at your younger years, when you're very young, I think you have a lot of self-limiting beliefs that you get over when you get to be an older adult. And then at the same time, it's kind of the reverse, because even though you may not have the best self-esteem or confidence, or maybe just like the dumb self-esteem, but you're not a well-developed human in your early 20s.
You're making very uninformed decisions.
But yet they work out.
But they work
often.
Often. I mean, my parents, I'm sure they were like quivering or just like, what is he doing? Right?
There's a thread through it, like of maturity and good decision making. That's a through line.
That's the bedrock. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I say that about my parents. I'm sure they were quivering. And I made that assumption though. My parents have gone on to tell me like, we would have never been that brave. Like we can't even express to you how much we admire that, that you were willing to do that. And, for that, I always kind of incurred this or internalized this feeling of shame when in fact I was actually doing something quite courageous and admirable, no matter how stupid it was.
Yeah, I think I can't imagine anybody who doesn't struggle with some degree of shame in terms of the structure you've been given by your parents. Am I fitting into it? Nobody's usually proud. On the deep inside, it's like,
right.
Do I fit into what I'm supposed to be doing? And then as you get older, you're like, oh, actually, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean,
it's just a random person's rules, basically.
Yeah, essentially, which is kind of everything you're ever given, right? And as a father, it's the same thing that I'm like, I can see me doing it to my kid.
Yeah.
Like imposing these like arbitrary rules just because like I was given these arbitrary rules at some point. And it's just like, and my kids, God bless them, for background, my twin boys are both autistic, and they both obviously have difficulty with social norms, not just because they're autistic, but because they're 5 or not even 5. Like they're still essentially aliens on this planet. So like everything feels arbitrary when you set these like guidelines and limits on them. And so it's like I'm now working hard to try to undo some of that stuff because I know how toxic it's been for me.
Right. Yeah. I think it's kind of a catch-22 because you have to have guidelines and things, but you as a parent, you're never going to win.
No. I mean, listen, it's my therapy bills are enough to, and it's like the only reason our parents don't have these therapy bills is because like they thought it was bad to, or there was some like evil black mark on them to go.
Yeah. I think therapy also itself has changed. It's become a lot more individual focused and empowering as opposed to whatever it used to be.
I'm just trying to figure out what's wrong with me.
Right. Yeah.
As opposed to I'm just trying to understand why I do the things I do. Not that they're wrong. I just want to understand them.
Right. And all like compassion based, because it's a lot easier to work with all your shadow selves when you're looking at them with compassion as opposed to let's fix this.
Yeah, right.
like let's get rid of it. It's like,
I want to eliminate that shadow.
Yeah. No,
And
they're not
like,
going anywhere.
No, they're not going anywhere. Wherever you go, there you are.
So tell me about your recent diagnosis that surprised you and how, I know you had mentioned once how it kind of changed the way you viewed your past and things that happened. Tell me a little bit about that.
Okay. I mean, I've been in therapy. I'd been in therapy a long time with one therapist, and that was really like Freudian, so it was a lot of like analysis, and she always wanted me to be sitting on the couch to like free myself, and like it wasn't really rooted in anything like practical in the sense of like there was no practical application, but I gained a lot of self-awareness, right? But nothing was ever mentioned about possible biological reasons that I might be this way or what have you. And then I kind of excused myself from therapy for a while, and then life became kind of untenable for me and everybody around me unless I started to kind of revisit some of this stuff. And I found a therapist who was much more action based. And like early on, from like first few sessions, I think with that guy, he was just like, has anybody ever told you that you are like textbook case ADHD? And I said, no. Like, why? No, I'm not ADHD. You know, like it didn't even enter my mind, and nobody, and there's a reason for that, is because like our generation, there was a lot less understood about neurodivergences and what these diagnoses meant. And it was only the most extreme cases who ever got a diagnosis ever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I would not have been diagnosed. And when you have something like ADHD, but you don't know it, you start to internalize, oh, I'm just lazy, or I don't have or man, I'm a space cadet. Like my grandma was a space cadet. Like she could lose anything immediately, and I'm just like her, right? And like, so I was just like, oh, genetically, I'm like my grandma. Like whatever, like doesn't matter. But you learn your coping skills to kind of like acclimate yourself to the world as is laid out to you and is defined to be. So as your parents kind of, put the arbitrary rules, and you're just like, I learned to fit the rules as best I could, and I learned the skills that it took to operate within that system. Well, that led to a lot of self-loathing, a lot of shame, a lot of misunderstanding myself, a lot of hurting others and myself. And I was just as confused at 45 as I was at 15, right? It also took kind of like watching some of these things start to play out in my children. Even at, a very young age, you can see these things. And, we have the benefit of like both my children were diagnosed very young, so we can kind of be on the lookout. But it turned an additional lens on me of like, oh, wow. And for better or worse, again, I'm somebody who doesn't like dive too deep. Like, so I didn't like research everything on ADHD, right? Like, I don't have time for that. And I didn't have the obsessive self-interest around it. Instead, I turned to memes and all these like meme accounts of like people like writing these little like missives about like, and I'm like, holy shit, that's me, and like, oh my God, that's me too, and like all the things made sense that all these people were like obviously saying to be funny, but they were just so relatable. And then I could sit there and go like, wow, I could look at these major points in my life and go, man, I thought I was just lazy. I'm not just lazy. I couldn't develop, because I didn't have that inherent self-interest in that, I could not apply myself to that.
Mm-hmm.
Or, like I lack executive functioning around bill paying or something. Turns out that's really common. I didn't know. I thought I was a piece of shit,
Mm-hmm.
Who just like couldn't do anything. No, it turns out that like this is actually really common. On top of it, ADHD folks are like constant dopamine searchers,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like we're constantly looking for novelty. We're easily bored. We're susceptible to kind of like losing time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just hyperactivity. It's not physical hyperactivity necessarily. It's also a very mental hyperactivity in the sense of like we're just never really sitting in the same place mentally for very long, right? Or the opposite is also true of ADHD, where we can obsess about certain things. Like I will relitigate conversations that I had in the 3rd grade over and over and over. And then a year later, I'll do it again, and I'm just like, where did this come from? But like, I can't not do it. And so then when put into that context, and somebody I could work and partner with a therapist, a like licensed professional, to say, here, let's try these over-the-counter ways to regulate some of this stuff and see how you benefit. You know, and the first thing I started was anxiety meds, because like there's a tremendous amount of anxiety to people with ADHD. But I think I also suffer from just general anxiety disorder or as well. So we did that, and that made an immediate impact of like kind of like raising my tolerance threshold before like I kind of like would bug out and become overwhelmed. And then finding a stimulant-based medication to kind of like focus this overactive brain, which is hilarious that a stimulant does it. But I mean, it's just like, it's kind of like, it's controlling that dopamine release in the sense of like, it's regulating it, as opposed to just like constantly seeking like huge and then having a depletion. There's a lot of forgiveness I had to give myself, right? Because like I have told a really negative story to myself about myself my entire life. And so now it was like, oh, you know what? It's okay that I have to get up every 5 minutes sometimes. It's not all the time, but it's fine, you know? And like, that's part of the process. You know, I was always one of those people who like, you have 2 weeks to finish a project and you're doing it in 2 days. But I could always get results, right, in those 2 days. And I always felt like, well, that's just the way I work, right? Like I had to like, no, I needed the added urgency and dopamine hit that urgency brought. So now, like if I can have it regulated, I can at least bring some level of moving the ball down the court before I need a full court shot at the end. You know, some of the things that I've learned to kind of cope with that or survive, I have to undo, and then others I have to accept. But the first thing I have to accept is that it's okay. I have a neurodivergence. There is a biological reason that I am this way. It is not a moral failure. It is not a failure of integrity or ethics. It is a biological difference that makes my approach to living different than yours, or what has become the standard bearer that we're all expected to live by.
I have these final 3 questions that I'm going to try to ask everybody. So
here we go.
Okay. What's something you do a lot of when you're in a good place? Like a habit or a hobby?
I'm trying to think the last time I was in a good place. I listen to music. It's, and that's good or bad place, to be perfectly honest.
I was going to say, do you have a genre that you gravitate towards when you're feeling good?
Soul, R&B, and funk from like the late 60s to the early 90s. That's like the sweet spot. And the sweet spot's really like the mid to late 70s and early 80s.
Would you rather be peaceful and bored or inspired and restless?
I don't know that those two states are possible for me. But for the sake of the question, I'd rather be peaceful and restless.
Oh, God.
Honestly, probably peaceful and bored.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, because like, if you're bored, it's possible to be bored, but there's way too much to experience out of life that you can't cure that boredom without necessarily affecting your peace.
Okay.
You are capable, whereas like restlessness and inspired is like taxing all the time. It's like a constant drain of energy, or at least it requires a constant feeding of energy. And again, I do think that that answer is probably influenced by my age, and kind of position where I'm at in life. And why I say it wasn't realistic is like my life is both inspired and restless at all times, and that's before you get to my job,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that's just my chaotic inner workings of my house,
Mm-hmm.
and that is so exhausting
Mm.
that I would really appreciate some peace and boredom. Yeah.
Last question.
Okay.
What is the most moving piece of art you've ever seen, heard, or experienced?
Guernica. Pablo Picasso's Guernica.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, like studying it in art history, I had, I was fortunate enough to have like an art history professor who was, you either loved him or hated him, but he was because he was super pretentious, but he was super passionate. And he really brought stuff to life in a way that nobody had done before for me in terms of any kind of history, political or art. And I love history, but like this guy really like would put things contextually. It didn't stop me from falling asleep in his class. I definitely did that, but because the lights go out and the slides go on, but I still like, I just remember being just like all of my neurons being like fired in talking about Guernica. I mean, he spent an entire class talking about it and the context around it and the color choices and the composition and, and the terror and the political upheaval and the war, like that went into it and just how tragic it was. And then to go to see it in person was just like, I mean, I rarely tear over stuff like that in public. That doesn't mean I don't cry, because I can cry at a Hallmark commercial if it's written right. But I like was moved to tears. It was super overwhelming. I sat there for hours looking at it. I used to keep a copy of it. I haven't put it up in a while, right above my desk. And I'm not even somebody who's like particularly like, I'm not gaga about Picasso or anything. And then it's followed closely by Hieronymus Bosch, Garden of Earthly Delights, because it's psychedelic and weird and really crazy, awesome, but also a glimpse into that contextually, that life of the 1500s or late 1400s or whatever. Like it really actually brings that to life too in these like just little scenes. Yeah. But Guernica.
What's ironic about my interview with Alan is we never recorded a goodbye. And so, true to Alan's status as a work in progress, the work never truly ends, right? So, as we close this episode, I propose stopping for a minute to consider, are you okay with the unresolved? Are you comfortable with never being done? Would your strength increase if you accepted the fact that the only constant is change? And maybe that's exactly where your joy is hiding. I hope you enjoyed meeting or reconnecting with Alan. I will see you next time on Third Concept.